All right, welcome everyone to week 7, chapter 8 of the Phoenix Book Club. This week's chapter, chapter 8, is at the beginning of part 2 of the book. We're getting into the more interactive parts of our application, but we're not yet into channels. And so this chapter mostly covers you have to do some JavaScript to kind of get the embedding of the YouTube videos to work, and then there's some extra work done. Let's see, we do kind of slugs and a few things like that. So it's still, for the most part, just request and response sort of stuff. So this week on the call we have just a couple of us. Jon, you want to start off with your introduction?
I'm Jon. I still work at MX, thankfully. And I was actually excited to be caught up this week. So I've been pretty behind the last few weeks, and I'm enjoying Elixir and Phoenix, and super excited for channels next week. I've already kind of briefed a few pages of it.
Awesome. I'm actually also excited. I've written one sort of channels-based thing, but without really knowing the fundamentals of them, so I have a feeling I probably did lots of things wrong. Hopefully I'll learn better next week. All right, Dave, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm Dave Hackett. I still work at Master Control, and let's see. Yeah, I've been a regular on the call. I'm fairly impressed with myself that I've been here every week since the start. That's really good for me. I know I flaked out at the last. What was the name of that? The other book that we did, and you guys finished, and I did like 3 weeks worth.
Nan to Tetris?
Yeah, Nan to Tetris. That's what. I still need to finish that book. Anyway, so yep, and yeah, still loving Elixir and Phoenix both. I'm excited that they gave an update. They released another updated beta version, so that's good.
All right. I'm Mike Ries. I have managed to be here for all the chapters of Nan to Tetris and Phoenix Book Club, only because it's my job to start the video call. I'm pretty sure I would have missed at least a couple of weeks of each if it weren't my job to start it. So yeah, I'm also really enjoying Phoenix and Elixir stuff these days. Specifically this week, I've been trying to learn a little bit about Elixir macros, and that's been a whirlwind education, but very fun so far. All right, so follow-up items. Does anyone have any follow-up items this week? I'm going to check my notes.
Actually, I've got something quick, and it's more towards Dave. A few weeks ago, when you were having issues with, I forgot what it was. It was brunch, but we had Chris on, and afterwards, Chris said, "Hey, let's get together and hash it out and fix it." Uh-huh. What did you guys actually? I don't know if you've talked about this. What did you guys actually do to fix that? I was reminded of your issues while I was reading about brunch in here.
Yeah. So the issue. I'll share my screen again. I think I did this a week or two ago, but I'll show you. I'll show it again. No harm in showing.
The caveat is 2 weeks ago I was not on the call, so.
Oh, and you obviously didn't watch the video, so.
And I obviously did not watch the video.
All right.
But we'll just do it again.
Yeah, I can share.
My excuse is we had a baby, so.
I think that covers basically everything.
That's really, as far as school goes, if any classwork, it's a death or a birth is your freebie of class, so I'm banking on that.
Yeah, I had a band teacher when I was in junior high that said you can only miss a concert for 2 reasons: a wedding and a funeral, and they both have to be your own. So it's kind of scary. Right. Let's see.
So Garrett's on. Should we have Garrett introduce himself while Dave's getting this up?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm Garrett, and wait for it. These are my emojis. Do they work? Yes.
Horse.
Everyone wrote Horse, Ghost, and Space Invaders tonight. My name's Garrett. I work at MX. I've been in this book club since inception, and I am excited to talk about things.
All right. Super specific. All right. So we're just really quickly going over follow-up items. So Dave's gonna show what the resolution was with the delete links.
Yeah, so to get my delete links to work, it was a problem with Brunch, and I'm happy to say, I guess I could report back on this. I was just notified yesterday that the issue has been fixed. And it was basically on this line here for the auto require. In Windows, it didn't use a file separator, an agnostic file separation, so it would fail on this line because it was just that, the /. And so it's fine on this bit here, but it's not fine here. I don't know why. There was some internals for Brunch itself, but that's the quick workaround fix for Windows, and then it worked fine.
So this is just like the Brunch config. Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is
Brunch
sorry.
config JS. Okay.
I've got tons of tabs open. Here, we'll do this. Close other tabs. There we go.
He said to close out all your. Cool.
All right. Brunch config JS. Yeah. But yeah, I just had to change it to that, and it worked great.
I thought it was going to be much more involved.
I thought so too. I did not think that it would be that simple, but it was, thankfully. But we did spend, Chris and I were on a call for almost an hour, and then the next morning I was doing some more testing. So it was really cool. I told him if there's ever any other Windows stuff that he needed, because he doesn't have Windows, and neither does Jose. So I said, if you guys ever need anything, just let me know. I can always be a guinea pig.
Dang, I need to go buy a Windows machine. PC does what? All right, so the only other follow-up item, I'm delinquent this week. Last time we had talked about what happens if you have a macro which defines a default implementation of a function, but what would happen if you have two of those and you try to invoke both of those macros in the same module? So I need to test that out. I was looking into macros this week, but I didn't get an example up and running to figure out what that failure looks like. So I'll try and get that done this week. Anyone else have a follow-up item from a previous week? All right. All right, so let's just talk about the chapter then. All right. I guess I'll open it up before I say my first thing. Anyone have something that they just totally loved in this chapter or totally hated?
I could say something. I really liked how they totally dodged the JavaScript war bullet by just saying, we chose Brunch because we found it was really good. But if you don't like Brunch and want nothing to do with it, that's fine, because there's no code that is dependent on Brunch being there in Phoenix. And to me, that is so smart, because a lot of the apps at MX that we do in Rails, that would be kind of fun to rewrite in Elixir, don't require views at all. So it'd be cool to just say static, or the asset pipeline, you're gone. And there are other apps where we've started using at MX where we just kind of have our own front-end stack, and then we just kind of drop that as an asset blob into a Rails app. And we've gotten into some issues where Rails is slow because it's trying to recompress the JavaScript that's already been compressed from something like Webpack. And just being able to just drop the asset pipeline out and pick a different asset pipeline that you want to use is a major thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I like that as well. And for some of the same reasons, I played around a little bit with making a prototype of an app, and I actually wrote it so it didn't use brunch either. I generated a Phoenix app with the -- no brunch, or I think that's the flag for it. And then I just let our existing Webpack thing do its own build, and I just symlinked it into priv static, and that works fine. Also, but yeah, it would be nice to have it somewhat integrated so that from a development perspective, it was easy to let the app kind of auto reload and that sort of stuff for our JavaScript developers. But yeah, it's a good trade-off, I think, to say, hey, out of the box we have something that works, and it just will come configured out of the box, but it's very loosely coupled. You just replace these four things if you want to switch it with something else.
Yeah, I'd say a +1 to that as well. I really liked how they said, look, we don't want another. They chose Node so that they could not fall into the let's manage our own front-end dependencies thing. I really liked that because it also, at least my perception of the JavaScript world is things don't tend to stay around, or it's not as solid as other environments, like just frameworks come and go or build tools come and go in the JavaScript world. Not saying that they're bad, it's just I think they're at a much faster iterative cycle. For whatever reason, I have no idea. But I think it's really good because then if all of a sudden maybe brunch doesn't stay around for another, in 2 years it's dead or something, nobody's maintaining it, they're on to the next thing. And they can just scrap it in Phoenix and go to another one. I think that's a very smart move.
Yeah. All right. So another thing I liked, this was actually even earlier in the chapter than the mention about brunch, and technically not part of chapter 8. During kind of like the intro to part 2, there's a couple of comments they made that I just was like, when I read them, my mind just exploded and unicorns and rainbows came out of my head. And so one of them, it says, you'll learn to build service layers with the OTP API, the famous Erlang library for building supervised fault-tolerant services. For some reason, just when I read that this time, I was just thinking about kind of OTP applications, and that idea of basically saying like, hey, you can take this group of modules, and they form an application, which is just a way to say that this is an independently runnable set of functionality that has its own supervision tree and everything. And the thing that struck me about that this week when I read that is I've been thinking a lot recently about things like microservices. At work, we have a service-oriented architecture. I wouldn't call it microservices because they're not bite-sized services. They are larger than that, but they're like, each of them is probably, I don't know, 10,000 lines of code or something like that. I don't know, maybe Garrett wants to weigh in and correct me there, but that's roughly the size of each of those services. And one of the big benefits we get out of that is just that you can have as much like discipline on your team as you want, but it's still really hard to keep things uncoupled if they grow up in the same place. And if those ideas, like if the time that I'm working on the idea of a budgeting system, if all the other models exist, it's very difficult for me, even when I try to be very disciplined, it's very difficult for me to keep it decoupled from the other things happening in that Rails app. And when I'm limited to saying the only way for me to interact with the other services is with messages, there's no shared state, there's no shortcuts, I just have to send messages, then it's a really great way for me to enforce where there's breaks in the application. And this week, as I read that line about OTP and I was thinking about applications, I was like, this gives me a really great way, a really great level of abstraction that's not a full other process. It doesn't require networking code or anything like that for me to send messages from this set of functionality to that set, but yet it can grow up in its own space. When I'm running the test for this OTP application, only it will be started. None of the other applications are started. And so I am not as tempted to be reliant on them. And also, the other thing is that there's still some shared state when you do have multiple of these OTP applications running in a single Erlang virtual machine, because they do share things like ETS tables or like the Elixir version and Erlang version have to be the same for all of those, obviously. So there's still some shared state, and there's probably times where you'd want to break an Elixir application into running on separate machines or separate processes at least. But even if that's the case, because of the transparent networking layer that kind of comes built into the Erlang virtual machine, even going from like multiple OTP applications that actually run together at runtime, even going from that to splitting them out to running in totally separate processes, you would still have a very smooth transition between all of those different layers of how tightly coupled you want to let things be and how much separation you want to force for your team. And that is a really excellent set of tools that it's just not there in the other languages that I've played with. And so that for me was a huge thumbs up. That, I don't know, just having that one extra layer of abstraction feels to me like that would make a big difference in terms of the projects that I've seen go a little bit sideways during development, especially on a big team.
We use things like ZeroMQ, which can give us inter-process communication, and it can kind of let us say, run two little things in different threads, and we can use same process communication of threads, or we can do sockets on the same machine, so we can say between two actual programs running, so it's a little bit faster. But it's not agnostic to. There's no this transparent networking layer that Erlang will provide you. So even though we do use things like ZeroMQ, which make things a little bit nicer, but you're still far from this kind of dream concept of just being able to, I don't want to say scale out, but just kind of compose your infrastructure in a way that you would dream of doing with other languages.
Yeah, and it's interesting that tool of the agnostic, like when I'm sending a message from my process to some other process, it, like from the sender's perspective, it doesn't matter, different node, same node, whatever, it's all the same thing. And just because of that, if you look in the world of Erlang, there are a ton of different service discovery mechanisms that exist, which could be easily droppable into almost any application. Like I'm thinking of, there's one called gproc, there's another one, oh dang, I was reading about it recently, and it was kind of aimed at Internet of Things sorts of applications, and so it was all about the latency of when you register something in one place, how quickly does it show up across your whole cluster of machines, and they were basically able to have new registered processes coming into the cluster of machines at a rate of like 10,000 a second, and that was totally sustainable for them. Which is just crazy to think about. And so, I don't know, it seems to open up a whole new world of possibilities where right now if I want to do that and I want to roll my own service architecture, I'm going to have to figure out a discovery mechanism. I'm going to have to figure out what my networking layer looks like. I'll probably have to do a lot of tuning on that network layer. And so, I don't know, that stuff is just really nice to have baked in at the virtual machine level because there's just so many good default choices made for you at this point. All right, anyone else have something that they really loved or really hated?
So there was something else that I thought of. I'm going to share my screen so I can show it. Okay. So inside of it was fairly close to the beginning from what I remember. Like you're setting up the watch view, and there's this big, gnarly regular expression. And I thought, why does it feel so gnarly? And it's escaping every single / because they're using the / separator or delimiter for the regular expression, like start with a / end with the /. And I thought, well, I know that when I read about regular expressions, or at least the delimiters, you could use other characters, and so I decided that I was going to try and use the braces instead, so that it was a little bit, instead of seeing all these escape characters all the time, I would just more or less be seeing what I wanted to see with with ORing it together a little bit more clean, in my opinion. I just thought, as I was thinking about it just now, I thought, oh, I should submit an errata or erratum, whatever the singular is, on for the book, and just as a suggestion to say, hey, maybe instead of adding another, I don't know, six backslashes in there, why not use just a different character? So that was just something it was something small, but I just thought that that could have been a little bit better, a little more clear, instead of this big, scary regular expression.
So I was actually, yeah, sorry, I was actually on the errata site this week. I was looking at something else, but I actually noticed someone has already submitted an errata item for changing those delimiters and making it slightly simpler. That's so funny.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I didn't even check. I didn't look yet. So
that is crazy synchronicity, because I think that's the first time I've looked at the errata page for this book at all, and it just happened to be this week, and it happened to be the same thing. All right. Any other plus ones or minus ones? One other one that I had here, I'll share really quickly. Come on, share thing. Guess I gotta do that. So one other thing that I really liked from this introduction is, so it talked about OTP stuff, which I already ranted about way too long. And it also talks about this: you'll learn to test each concept in this book. We'll take you from isolated unit tests to integration tests that use multiple requests that build on each other. And I just have to say that, Jon already said he's super excited for channels. I might be even more excited for this part of the book than for channels, because I just love this idea that they're saying, they're going to cover testing at a bunch of different levels of abstraction, and I think that's going to be really useful. That's always one of those things that it seems like, at least when I was new to Rails, knowing where, is this test going to be more valuable for me in the long run if I write it as a controller test or as a model test? Being able to answer that question took me a long time, and I'm really hoping that it shortcuts that somewhat. That just sounds super enticing to me. So it sounds like that's going to start happening in Chapter 10, based on some tweets I saw, but just getting excited for that. All right. Anyone else have a plus one from this week at all? Cool. Well, let's then do actual plus ones. Did anyone do anything kind of differently from the book, or beyond kind of the scope of just what got covered in the chapter? I'll show one other thing. So I actually do need to go back and implement this the same way the chapter does, but one thing that seemed a little odd to me was the way they implemented slugs. So just to kind of refresh, basically what you ended up doing is you did a priv, repo migrations. You did this. They had us do this extra migration right here, where we added a column called slug to the video model. In the video, then you add that attribute to your schema. In your change set, you basically say, like, oh, after I've done some of the validations, you go ahead and you slugify the title, which just basically means that you grab the title of the video, and you escape some stuff, you change a few things, and then you take that slug, that calculated slug, and you assign that to the slug attribute if the title has a change on it. And then they had us go through and implement this param for our video data type. And this just basically said, it made it so that when you create a connection, or when you call a connection helper and you provide a video struct, it will automatically know to grab off both the ID and the slug and to render it this way. And this gives you these URLs that look like /watch/15 Erlang the movie or whatever, right? So it kind of gives you these slugified URLs. And then in terms of taking that slugified URL and looking it back up, their suggestion was to implement a custom ecto type for the ID column. And I don't know if this seemed odd to any of the rest of you. I'm kind of thinking that maybe they had us do this just as a like a way to expose us to. So basically, what you ended up doing is just said, "Oh, my field ID, instead of it just being the default integer, it's I think they called it slug ID or something." You ended up implementing this module that that had the behavior of a ecto type, and so that whenever you tried to in your model or in your controller over here, when you took in that ID and you tried to look up a video by its ID, it would use your custom type implementation to like change it from the slug back to an integer and then use that to do the query in the database. And that's fine and everything, but it just seemed weird to me that my model would care what's happening in the controller and view layer of my application. And so the way I implemented it instead was I just did this in this controller, and then in my video controller. Let's see, how did I do it here? Oh, I actually just did the same thing in multiple places. I was also thinking that it might be interesting to try to do a plug that only affects some of the endpoints, and so if they see an ID param, then they could try to parse the first integer out of it and then reassign that as the param before it gets to my controller. I think I maybe was on a different branch or something when I implemented that. But I preferred to do that kind of at the plug layer rather than at the model layer. And I'm just curious, did anyone else find that like implementing the custom ecto type, that seem odd to anyone else, or is that just me being pedantic?
I thought it was a little odd that they threw it in right at the end. It was super quick, and then just said that ecto types exist, and we can do things with it, which was basically the statement. I didn't necessarily get into why they did it, but I was looking up, and I don't really have an answer to this, but what they did is in the model, they made an app primary key. They gave it the ID, then they typed it with the permalink, file that did the ecto type, and then they auto-generated it and used a key for that instance, which, I mean, as you're bringing it up, sounds interesting, but it's not something I really thought of at the time, probably because it was like 12 o'clock at night when I was doing this end of the chapter. But,
yeah, baby.
Yeah, but I put that on my list. I wasn't fully sure why they were doing this primary key in the model right before the schema to do so, or how that. What was the main function or idea of keeping that in? Maybe it is like you were saying. They just to show that you could. This is another way to implement it.
Yeah. In any case, to me, it felt a little bit jammed in there. Which, I mean, if I needed to do custom types, maybe I would be like, "Oh, thank goodness they put this in the book," and I would be giving it the heart eyes emoji instead of the angry eyes emoji. But anyway, it just was one of those things that kind of stood out to me. So for my +1, I tried to implement that same behavior, but do it in the controller layer by making it kind of a plug. So that was it for me this week as far as any extra work sort of stuff. Oh, before the call, Garrett, we were trying to take bets on whether or not you would have looked at ecto this week.
Who wants the money? That's the question. I I started to like look at ecto, but I have nothing that I can actually add on it. I did not dive nearly as deep as I was planning on going, to the point where I'm not even going to say anything until I can actually say something and not sound like an idiot.
That's a better stance to take than I usually take on these kinds of video calls.
I will get around to it. It's on my to-do list of things I want to do, but I did not get around to it in as much depth as I wanted to this week.
Sweet. One other question actually I had for you, Garrett. You had mentioned to me at work the other day the idea of a follow-on book club. I'm wondering if you wanted to give a quick pitch for that to the other people on the call.
Yeah, so I was reading around, and there's this class that I've wanted. So I keep running into it. So people who have taken this and they really enjoy it. It's the MIT. It's like, what is it? Let me find it. It's the MIT 6828 Operating System Engineering class. There's like the fall 2011 class has some video lectures online. All the homework assignments are online. All the labs are online. You start off with this x86 version 6 of Unix, and you're basically building up this operating system and making it a bit more modern. It's something that's been on my list for about a year now, things that I've wanted to look at. I started working through some of the initial labs. Mike, you would know this because I send you screenshots of the chaoticness of it, but I think I want to start a book club with it. I'm like 80% certain it's going to be a good format, so more details to come, but if you guys are interested in taking the Operating Systems Engineering class as a book club, I'd be interested in a thumbs up.
Sweet. I was excited about that one just because I've been an application level developer for pretty much my whole career. I did a little bit of operating system level stuff in school, but it's definitely something that I am interested in, especially as I end up doing kind of more performance related things in my work. I'm always just, not knowing what's happening in the black box of the TCP stack, or the black box of why certain memory access things are much faster than others. I got a little bit of that in school, but it's been long enough that I'm sure there's better practices now than anything I would have learned in school anyway. So, so I'm somewhat interested in that. I'm not totally sure if that's exactly the next book club that I'm going to be ready to do, but that's a plus one for me. And anyone who is also interested in that watching, you should tweet at Film42. I don't believe the emojis are part of your Twitter handle.
Optional. We'll see if they work. If there's a thumbs down, then they're included. If it's not, then they're not included. It's a thumbs up. Just at Film42. No, I was actually talking to Zach, who's normally on here, and he told me that this is something that he's interested in. There's a bunch of different operating system classes, but I just heard multiple people say this class is awesome, definitely worth taking. So I'll leave it at that.
Sweet. All right, let's just then wrap this up. Does anyone else have anything else they want to bring up? All right.
I'll say there's this article I saw. I didn't dive into too much, but it's Elixir concepts for Go developers, and I've seen this come around a couple times. But it was cool because they just start with the list. I'll drop this in the Slack, in our Slack here. But actually, can I see if I can just do this? Uh-oh. Gonna try it. Screen share. So there's this, uh-oh.
There you go, I'm seeing it.
So there's this article, and it basically runs through things like atoms, processes, and Go routines. It goes through the pipe operator, macros. I thought this one was cool. It goes over supervisors, and it gives you an example of how you can build a supervisor in Golang, how you can use this defer key to basically say run a function, and then after this function exits, process something so you can actually see if kind of recover it. this is really handy for things like file descriptors. Say like, okay, well, when the function exits, make sure you do all this cleanup stuff. It's almost like a deconstructor in C++ or something. As something falls out of scope, but it's really creative, crafting creative way of writing supervisors. And I'd played with Go before, and when I saw this, I was like, oh yeah, let's see how it compares apples and oranges. But Go kind of stood up to some things, and I was very surprised considering how simple it was. But I guess my takeaway here was just a really cool, interesting, abstract article, and definitely worth looking through if you've, I don't know, are interested in that kind of a thing.
Sweet. Yeah, let's wrap up then with going around the horn and one cool thing you learned this week. I don't know, Garrett, if that was your one cool thing you learned this week or not.
Yeah, we'll call that my interesting thing I learned this week.
Sweet. John or Dave, you guys want to show us something? This is a game of chicken now.
My mic's muted. I gotta think about what I would show.
You don't have to show something for it. Sorry, I just meant any one cool thing that you noticed or learned this week.
I really liked, well, I learned a little JavaScript. That was pretty new to me. Kind of getting into that. I liked how they did make, when they were talking about brunch, and Garrett kind of already stepped on it, or touched on it, not stepped on it, but it was basically like, we have this here, but it's also super easy, one line, change whatever you want to use, and then you can, you could use your own services. So you still have some flexibility when you're playing with these other parts of the application that are not Phoenix restrictive. So they're, I think that something besides brunch is faster, or I think that this compilation works better, so you can add it in. And I don't know, that was it. I thought that was kind of cool.
Sweet. This week's chapter actually for me did feel a little bit light on the Elixir side. It was obviously dealing a little bit more with the JavaScript that was going on to get YouTube videos to play and stuff like that, which is obviously important for this application to get running, and for most applications that needs to happen. But I don't know, not my favorite topic. So I'm excited for next week. Channels are a little bit more Elixir specific. So my one cool thing this week, I mentioned this kind of at the beginning of the call, but I've been looking a little bit at Elixir macros. So this is, at work we have this existing project called Atlas, which is a collection of all the protobuf definitions that kind of make up our platform. So anything that gets talked about between the services use these protobuf objects, these definitions. And this is just our way of kind of doing additive-only changes and very rarely doing any sort of backwards breaking changes. And so I found a really cool library called EX Protobuf that does something like this. And so I've been trying to make some adjustments to it this week. Out of the box right now today, it kind of supports this ability where you can say, you could kind of take all of this out, and you could do something like this, where you can say, oh, make a module, and tell it to load all these protobuf definitions from this given protobuf file. But because we've been doing this for a while, we have a lot of protobuf files, and so I worked this week a little bit on adding the ability to specify multiple files and just have this EX Protobuf library load all of those in. And the way this ends up working is totally crazy, but basically this using def macro gets called when you call use protobuf. And this thing does a whole bunch of really interesting things I've never seen before in Elixir. A lot of these may or may not be interesting to different people, but the thing that I found most interesting is, like Chris McCord mentioned when he was on a few weeks ago, at compile time you have basically any other module that you want to depend on. Just by using it, you kind of get an implicit dependency on it, And so that other thing needs to not depend on you because you can't have a circular compile time dependency. But basically, your whole library and any other libraries that you depend on are immediately available to you. So they do all these cool things during compile time, where they, for instance, like do pattern matching on your configuration options, and then all these just normal Elixir functions are available to them, so you don't have to do like any different stuff with your compile time code as you do with your regular code. And so, you're reading files, you're doing other pattern matching. In this case, I added some more support for namespaces and package namespaces and mapping the protobuf package namespaces into Elixir module namespaces. And so, I do some of that here, and I'm using pipe operators and all this other stuff. And then I'm kind of down in the guts of this project. Right here, they're calling these Erlang modules from another language or another library called GPB, and that is an Erlang implementation of a parser for protobuf definitions. And so, rather than like re-implementing all this parsing logic, he's just like, no, I have a dependency on this GPB library, and I know it's loaded, and so I could just use all of its functions during my compile time stuff, even though that Erlang was written to be run at runtime. But just by using it during compile time, the Elixir compiler will run it in the right order so that it's available. And so I'm still a total noob at all this compile time stuff, but what this ends up meaning for me and for my project is that I can basically make a hex package that includes a dependency on EX protobuf, and it packages up all my protobuf definitions. And then when I actually load that in some other project, that other project can basically say, oh, when I run mix compile in my other application, it will go find and compile all these protobuf definitions, and then I can also depend on that compilation happening to do other stuff. So like I can write an application level rule that says, oh, walk across all of the protobuf definitions that I compiled into Elixir modules and get a list of those, and then walk through those and generate some some specific versions of different functions, some different function clauses based on the different types, so that at runtime my application will just be able to say like, oh, go call this other RPC endpoint, and it will already know what all the types are that it needs to build these protobuf objects and serialize them to binary the right way. So anyway, it feels super cool, and it's really interesting to compare that to doing metaprogramming in like Ruby, where you're really using a lot of reflection to decide what things you're going to generate. And in this case, you just are doing it at compile time. And then having those two worlds separate but using the same set of tools is a unique experience for me. So that was my my big +1 for this week. Dave, you got anything?
Yeah. So it's kind of from the chapter, but I didn't spend time learning more about it. But Elixir Protocols, I thought that was really interesting. Saying they said something to the effect. I'm trying to find exactly what it was. They were like getting polymorphism through protocols, if I'm remembering correctly. But it kind of reminded me of I haven't messed around with them too much, but multi-methods in Clojure, and maybe they're not the same thing. But I just remember working on a kind of a stupid project for learning the state pattern for an object-oriented design pattern. And one of the guys doing it with me, he's like, oh, well, I thought of how could I do this in Clojure, because he's a really big Clojure guy. And so he looked into it more and found multi-methods, and he was like, I implemented it with multi-methods, and he showed it to me, and it's like, oh, that's really neat, being able to use the same function definition for multiple inputs, and maybe it would go more along the lines of like pattern matching in Elixir. I'm not quite sure, but just the fact that it was like, here's these protocols and you can implement them. So like we implemented the Phoenix.param protocol, and it was yeah, I don't know if it really did the best job at explaining it. Maybe I would have liked more. Maybe that's where I should have gone and learned more myself. Of just saying, like, because we have this 2-param function inside of our protocol implementation, we are able to do X, Y, Z, and all these things just come for free or whatever. But that was something I thought was cool, where you still had this kind of polymorphic ability through protocols.
So I have one more, and it's so simple. I think I missed this earlier in the book, but where I'm still getting the hang of even Rails, and I'm still thinking or looking through Phoenix, a lot of my mind has gone through, well, why is this organized this way? Why is it placed in this folder? Why do we want this as a layout instead of a template, or vice versa? But they made a comment when you did make that ecto type, that they put it in the lib instead of the web, and the difference was because web is where code reloading happens. So when we're doing like all this auto refreshing, auto reloading, it's happening there, but lib is not, and so that's more of a supporting code area. And again, it even says remember, and I obviously did not remember reading that in the book, but I really liked that kind of gave me some more thought or direction into why these things are organized the way they are, and how it's different through some other experiences that I had. So now that when I'm building my own stuff, I have more of a concrete idea of, well, when I want this to do this, I know where to put it, et cetera, et cetera. So super, super simple. But that was actually a note that I had made that I had forgotten, obviously.
Sweet. Tell Stephanie we said hi, and we hope she feels better.
Hey, they say hi, Stephanie.
They heard me coughing.
I don't know. She's over there coughing, actually.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's gonna be it. I'm actually curious, Garrett. You are you were really into Clojure. You are into Clojure. I don't know. Was the comparison between multi-methods and protocols? Do you want to weigh in on that at all?
I was going to say, I was thinking something a little bit different. I was actually thinking outside of Clojure, because I haven't worked with Clojure in like a couple months, and I never really worked with multi-methods too much. I mostly just worked with like, I don't even remember the terms anymore, just like doing def record against a def interface, just doing an interface and a record, and how you could, it's kind of the same in that like you can create any number of interfaces, and when you create some record, it can just, you can pick any number of interfaces or any number of kind of protocols to implement for, and then they just kind of compose. But it doesn't work because it's not quite the same thing here, because what we did with the protocol in Elixir was we just said in the middle of nowhere, I'm just going to say, by the way, I'm going to stick this protocol onto this type of object, or I'm going to handle this specific thing and handle it. And that reminded me a lot more of how Rust builds its type system, or how it will build off of structs, because basically what you do is you define your data, you define your struct, and then everything that's every method that really is called is defined as some implementation. So you can implement like toString for your struct, or you can implement some like HTTP requests for your struct, and it just kind of composes that way. It also kind of reminded me of like traits in Scala, where you can just define traits that either have an interface, a blank implementation, or a default implementation. It's a little bit more clear than Rust in a way, but it's still just something that you just can bolt on and just say implements this kind of this trait, and any object or any class can have any number of traits. So those are both Scala would be an object-oriented example, and Rust would be something far more analogous to what we're seeing in Elixir. But I just think the whole idea of protocols is really nice. It's a great way of composing, and it solves a lot of pain. What I haven't seen, and what I am really kind of looking for is, and this is, maybe I shouldn't even talk this through, but like a lot of people are comparing like Ruby and Rust together, and the relationship between a functional and an object-oriented language. And it's interesting because a lot of them give examples, but then they fail to talk about things like inheritance and how like Ruby is, objects everywhere and they're inheriting from everything. It's hard to find a good example, a good pattern like in a functional language that can kind of capture that power. But that's something that's like, I just don't feel like it's something that's supposed to fit, and you can find a better solution for it, like protocols or something.
Interesting.
So that was a ramble.
No, it's. I mean, I've just never done any Scala, and I've only done enough Clojure, like just kind of the basics of defining functions and passing data around. That's so. Yeah, it makes me both want to play around more with those things, and makes me want to play around less with them. That makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Deal with it, as Zach would say if he were on the call. All right, cool. I will say I play around a little bit with protocols. I tried to implement. So a while ago, I was kind of going through the Programming Pearls book. I don't know if any of you guys have looked at that, but the first example that they have is this example of using a bitmap implementation to store and sort a collection of items. And I implemented one of those in Elixir, and then I tried to implement the enumerable protocol in my module that implemented bitmap, so that I could just say like enum to list or enum into a list or enum each and things like that on my kind of custom struct object or my struct or struct object. Anyway, it was I'll say. Enumerable was a good place to start in some ways and a bad place to start in other ways. The enumerable protocol is pretty easy to implement if you know a good place to start, but the string API is very easy to implement, at least for me. It was like super confusing. So maybe start with some of the Phoenix protocols would be my suggestion. All right, well I think that does it for us this week. Anyone else have final words? All right, silence it is. All right, we'll see everyone next week.